image of that man, George Floyd, who was put in the most exposed, demeaning position by a group of police officers. And then one particular police officer who pinned his knee to the man's neck, not for 5-10 seconds, but for at least 5 minutes. As the man begged for mercy. This was someone that the people that knew him called him a gentle giant. And he reduced this man to tears, to such helplessness that this grown man was calling his mother. I cannot underscore to what extent the wealth and success and the status of superpower of this country has been on the backs of Black Americans. The millions who were brought here from Africa, and especially West Africa and many Muslim areas of West Africa, and enslaved. And their freedom was stolen from them. Their families were torn apart. And their labor was usurped. And their rights and their dignity was violated. Yet this country became powerful and became successful and became a country that so many people sought out as a paradise on earth, including my own family. What does this mean to us as Muslims? When we see that police officer place his knee on that man's neck. For a moment, let's think about the pathology of a society that, on the one hand, celebrates and extols the strength and virility of Black masculinity when we are consuming, for example, sports and benefiting from the brilliance and the athletic prowess of countless Black athletes, or admiring the sort of appeal and virility of Black male entertainers and musicians and hip hop artists and so on. The pathology of a society that celebrates those manifestations of Black masculinity on one hand, yet criminalizes it on the other hand, to the extent that Black male public presence is seen as threatening, to the extent that someone perhaps unwittingly in a transaction passes a counterfeit $20 bill, and that person is deemed so threatening by that police officer who is shaped by a society that that man has to be killed. A society that where a woman thinks it's okay, for example, to call the police when a Black man, an African-American man who is bird watching in a park, politely asks her to put her dog on a leash so that that dog will not scare away the birds. And her response, and by the way, someone who was probably a liberal, her response was to call the police, to call 911, and to emphasize that an African-American man was threatening her. Again, as Muslims, we really have to think, and think deeply about the pathology of a society that both celebrates certain aspects of Black masculinity and then also seeks to criminalize it, to the point where that man is not even seen as a human being, whose life does not have to be respected. And I know you're probably wondering, how does this relate to the book that we studied? Well, inshallah, I'm going to leave it to everyone here and those who might be joining us via live stream to begin to make those connections. That we do not admire this intellectual tradition of ours as something, as a nice object that we curate and we just place on a shelf somewhere. But to really begin to think about how we can translate what we studied in this book to what we see around us, the reality that we see around us. Because there's nothing in this book that would ever lead me to believe that we as a community have to be quiet and passive in the face of injustice and oppression. Especially when we as a community have benefited so much from the patience, the grace, and the sacrifice of countless Black Americans. Now, before we conclude, I'm going to wrap up in the next few minutes, inshallah ta'ala. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya devotes considerable time to an argument that pre-modern Muslims had about patience and gratitude. Is one better than the other? And there was the group who argued in favor of sabr, naturally, noting that Allah ta'ala praises sabr and the people of sabr again and again, and orders us to be people of sabr. Attaches it to great benefit we'll receive in this world and the hereafter, and mentions it probably over 90 times in the Holy Quran. But then there's the other group that says that no, shukr is better, and that Allah Ta'ala makes a direct comparison between gratitude and faith itself, and divides people into those who are thankful and grateful, and those who are, kuffar, those who are ungrateful. So this is, I think, a very plausible argument. But at the end of the day, right, I think what Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya concludes is that people are at different levels. The reality is that patience will predominate in some and thankfulness predominates in others. And what we as a community should seek to be is to be people who are not devoid of either one. Because it's when we are devoid of patience and gratitude that we cease to be a benefit to ourselves, to those around us. And no less than Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, if patience and gratitude were two riding animals I had to choose from, I would not mind which one I picked. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to let us be people who embody both. And ultimately, what undermines patience, right, in the eyes of Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya? It's when we consign ultimate hope in limited and worldly means, and we trust the creation more than the creator. And let's not make that mistake, right? For those of you that are wondering what you can do in the face of injustice, right? Remember that our ultimate appeal, right? It's not to any type of person or structure. Our ultimate appeal is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we also have the responsibility to identify ways in which we might be adding to the problem. And we also have the responsibility to identify ways in which we can help to mitigate the problem. And finally, remember the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that beautiful balance in Asma' al-Husna, the beautiful names of God. Yes, there are attributes of jamal, of beauty and gentleness, but they are always balanced with attributes of jalal, majesty and power and grandeur. Right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes himself as as-sabur, for example, and as-shakur, right? That Allah ta'ala is telling us just a little bit about those qualities that we ought to be manifesting in ourselves and those around us, right? If Allah Ta'ala is patient with our ingratitude, as collectively, as in terms of humanity, if Allah Ta'ala is patient with our ingratitude and our disobedience and our associating partners with Him in things large and small, right? If Allah Ta'ala recognizes our most paltry efforts because He is Shakur and He forgives us for our countless mistakes and sins, where is the ability to forgive and overlook the actions of George Floyd? And where is the reaching out to his family with our sympathies and our condolences? And where is the resolve to do a little bit better by those people in those communities where we set up shop and we profit from structures that have kept African Americans in a permanent underclass? And the supplications, the dua that we make, I also want us to think about these people whose lives were taken from them unjustly. People whose crime was nothing other than they were Black, and some of them outside in public doing normal things, and some of them actually in what they thought was the safety of their own homes. And there are so many more names and faces that I could add to this list. For example, 92-year-old Katherine Johnston, an elderly woman, 92 years old, who was killed in her own home in Atlanta some years back when undercover policemen, using a no-knock warrant, raided her home. She was 92 years old. She was terrified. She had a weapon and she fired maybe one shot over the heads of the police officers, and they responded with a hail of bullets, and they killed her in her own home. And then they went and planted drugs in her home to try to cover their tracks. I could go on and on and on. The last thing that I will say to all of those who've taken this class is that part of being people of sabr is not being patient in the face of injustice. It's not being patient in the face of oppression. And it's also recognizing the things that we need to address in our own community. How many times perhaps have we been party to conversations where a Muslim, perhaps somebody of Arab background, in a very casually racist way says about a Black person or African Americans, abid, slaves, and thinks that that's okay? How many times have we witnessed where a Black person comes to the masjid to make prayer and they attempt to stand next to somebody who is of a different background, and that person moves away to distance themselves from that Black person? How many times have we witnessed being, I don't know, in a shopping center, and that person who is African American gives salam to someone who is an immigrant, and that immigrant turns away and will not even respond to their salam, despite the very visible Muslim appearance of that African American? Yet they are very comfortable exchanging the greeting with that person who happens to be from their own country, despite their secular appearance. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And I could have made this lesson entirely about Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya and this book and not said a word about what happened this week, but that would have been irresponsible. So I do ask you, as we conclude this class, as I pray that you were able to take away some reflections and some lessons about the importance of sabr and shukr in these trying circumstances, to understand that we have a responsibility to people around us. Even if we've never even known these people or met them, we have a responsibility to at least be that group of people that is consistent in terms of belief and action and belief and practice. Let us not be of those that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran, right? يا أيها الذين آمنوا لما تقولون ما لا تفعلون كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون. Right? O you who believe, why do you say that which you do not do? Grievous in the sight of God is that you should say that which you do not do. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive all of us for our shortcomings. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us, whether as individuals, families, communities, or in terms of the institutions that we set up, to be of khair and benefit to those around us. And never let the sacrifices of people whose lives were taken from them senselessly and unjustly to ever be in vain. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Jazakum Allah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.